Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video I'll be sharing some quick-fire quotes on Henry Jekyll from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. So Jekyll is a medical doctor fascinated with the supernatural and scientific progress. He makes a potion so he can switch between himself and his alter ego, the deadly and dangerous Hyde. He writes a will giving everything to Hyde, which sparks suspicion in his friends that he's being blackmailed. He also battles with the use of this potion because he knows that Hyde's actions are becoming more deadly. But he can't stop taking this potion, and it ends up with Hyde killing Sir Danvers Carew. At points, Jekyll turns into Hyde without even taking the potion, and he's becoming increasingly desperate, so much so that he begs his friend Lanyon to give him chemicals. Lanyon sees for himself the transformation and is very scared. Jekyll fears leaving his house in case he morphs into Hyde again in public. His supply of the chemical he needs is running low, and he finds it increasingly difficult to find this chemical. So, he uses the last of the chemical that he has and he writes a full disclosure to Utterson, explaining exactly what's happened. And then he changes into Hyde one more time, and he dies. So, this is the story of the demise of an innovative scientist, the fall of a man. Why does Stevenson do this? Well, Victorian readers were very suspicious of scientists, and perhaps Stevenson is playing a part in fueling the debate about science. The Origin of Species by Darwin was published in 1859. And in it, Darwin critiques the Bible, unpacks a different theory of evolution of mankind, and he sparks a huge amount of sensation around the idea that the answers aren't just in the Bible. But we meet in Jekyll a man who's keen to be innovative to the extent that it creates so much danger for his life and others. So Stevenson seems to be playing with suspicion when we're introduced and learn more of our protagonist. We wonder though, is it that Jekyll highlights the societal fascination with reputation? Because ultimately he's fueled about creating an alter ego because he is repressed, he's not able to express the more dark elements of his nature that he knows he shouldn't hold. It's interesting that it's not until the end of chapter 9 that we even learn that Jekyll and Hyde are the same person. And interestingly enough, for a huge protagonist in this text, it's only in chapter 10 that we learn candidly from Jekyll exactly what his perspective is. As protagonists go, Jekyll is best explained through his friends up until his own disclosure at the very end of this novella. So here are a few quick-fire quotes that offer you some attributes of his character and some links to why Stevenson might have included these moments. Jekyll is respected by society and his friends. He has a great reputation. Here we have the words of Enfield, an honest man paid through the nose for the capers of his youth. That adjective, honest, is heightening the idea that Jekyll is a good man, as seen by others. The idea of respectability is echoed throughout other words that Enfield uses to describe his friend. One of your fellows who do what they call good. Now the reference to they is interesting. It implies that society is they, when they're looking at what goodness is. The other quotation that I've listed here might seem a bit strange. The very pink of the proprieties, celebrated too. If you're in the pink, that means you're healthy. So he's very pink of the proprieties, so his moral health is exceptionally good. So much so it's celebrated. So we're not just looking at a good man, we're looking at a great man in terms of reputation from the view of others. Yet we know as readers that there's something deeper and more meaningfully traumatic about the fact that Jekyll is seen as brilliant by others, but inside is struggling with himself because he knows he's not that pure. The phrase paying through the nose is a really interesting truth to the reality for Jekyll. When you pay through the nose, you pay more than your fair share. It's true though, Jekyll is paying more than his fair share not because he's being blackmailed, as Enfield suspects, but because it's the cost that he's paying and suffering for his scientific endeavours. The capers of his youth is implying that he had some sort of previous deviant track record where he made a couple of mistakes, whereas actually the capers of his youth are the way he tries to act younger and behave in a more demonic fashion by using Hyde. So it's quite ironic here, Enfield presuming that Jekyll's being blackmailed, when in reality he's blackmailed himself with the creation of his split self. Stevenson amplifies our understanding of Jekyll's repressed desires. We even understand why he wants to split himself, because social standing has so much weight in his life. Jekyll definitely represents the facade of integrity, as we, as readers, know he leads a double life. Perhaps Stevenson's attacking Victorian ideals that repress people's individuality. Or simply, he could be stating that no one's really free of being impure in their thoughts. Jekyll is an innovative scientific intellectual. He's led wholly towards the mystic and transcendental, so much more focused on the supernatural than his companions like Lanyon, who seems much more practical and describes the supernatural as scientific heresies. Stevenson works incredibly hard for us to believe that Jekyll is a passionate scientist seeking the next discovery. And we learn the full extent of this in chapter 10 in his statement when he says, "I began to perceive more deeply than it has ever yet been stated, the trembling immateriality, the mist-like transience of the body." So we get the passion from this statement. To perceive more deeply seems like such a bold and innovative endeavour. He has ambitious desires. That comparative there, more deeply, he's comparing with us before him. That adverb, deeply, also implies he has intellectual prowess over those before him. Equally competitive is the phrase, "ever yet been stated." There's a thrill of discovery. That conjunction, "yet," and the dramatic adverb, "ever," add even more drama to his sense of achievement in what he was looking to find. The passionate desire that he had seems slightly lost, though, on very poetic, extremely abstract, and rather vague terminology. Trembling materiality, mist-like transience. Forgive me, but I feel like Stevenson could have worked harder here to provide our scientists with more scientific terminology. So are we meant to call into question the science behind Jekyll's argument? Or are we meant to question our writer, who may be more interested in the poetic than the factual? The one moment we have of defence for Jekyll as a scientist is his description of the potion when he says the drug had no discriminating actions, it was neither diabolical nor divine. So I like what that proves. He's saying the drug has no agenda. It will do its job because it's doing a chemical reaction. But the alliteration is so powerful in this phrasing of drug, discriminating, diabolical, divine. It accentuates in one phrase the emotional range of this troubled intellectual and the range of thoughts he can hold in his head at once. I suppose this quote is also powerful because it proves that the heart of this novel's debate is on whether you can truly ever be divine or diabolical to the extremes without a little of both at play. And I think Jekyll is really wrestling with himself when he's talking about the drug as neither divine nor diabolical. As the novella unravels, we see Jekyll as a tortured soul. Here are the words of his friend Lanyon describing what he sees in chapter 9. "Pale and shaken and half fainting and groping before him with his hands like a man restored from death." This factual account seems graphic. Pale, shaken, half fainting, groping. We're looking at symptoms here of damage and trauma. Such brutality seems so grotesque, and even more shocking when we hear it from the practical and logical voice of Lanyon. Is Stevenson shocking us here into accepting the full effects of the torture that Jekyll has imposed upon himself? By chapter 10, we learn of how this torture has wreaked havoc on Jekyll's existence when he says, "It is useless and the time awfully fails me to prolong this description. No one has ever suffered such torments. Let that suffice." Now here is the true fatalism of Jekyll as our victim. The situation is useless. Time awfully does fail him. He has suffered such torments that no one else has, and he is dying as he knows that that's the end of the potion as he's just drunk it. The littering of such depressed ideas underlines how our eccentric scientist has fallen from grace. Stevenson is pushing an idea here. Jekyll was a charismatic man, but here, the man who had a word for everything has lost words, and language is completely void and broken here. It's not the same sentiment of excitement that we once had. The real question is, does Jekyll represent a man addicted to his potion, science, respectability, or self-interest? I suspect Stevenson wants us to make a decision on which one it is. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?